Hello everyone, today we read and comment on the 19th paragraph of the second chapter of the second book of Von Clausewitz, Vom Kriege, the title being Extent of the Influence of Danger. The text follows: But to estimate exactly the influence of danger upon the principal actors in war, we must not limit its sphere to the physical danger of the moment. It dominates over the actor not only by threatening him, but also by threatening all entrusted to him, not only at the moment in which it is actually present, but also through the imagination at all other moments which have a connection with the present. Lastly, not only directly by itself, but also indirectly by the responsibility which makes it bear with tenfold weight on the mind of the chief actor. Who could advise or resolve upon a great battle without feeling his mind more or less wrought up or perplexed by the danger and responsibility which such a great act of decision carries in itself? We may say that action in war, in so far as it is real action, not a mere condition, is never out of the sphere of danger. So this paragraph is a further corollary of the previous one, talking about the element of danger and its outcome, right? Fear and all what derives in turn from it as well. In the relation that exists not just with, the conduct of war in itself, but also within the hierarchy of the army, right? Here, von Clausewitz shows us that at a behavioral level, we're not just scared of what is happening maybe at the moment because a bullet flies over our head, but we are scared automatically at the idea that something can happen, and this is increased in part by the fact that we depend on someone else, who in turn is overloaded by this responsibility of leading us to victory through extreme peril, right? So this is the concept here, which means at the end of the day that literally, like the last phrase says, that every action in war is never out of the sphere of danger, so that you can't escape it. There is no way out of there. And the same kind of conduct of war is essentially influenced by this, also because it's an instinctual factor, right? War is counter-instinctive in some way, because contrarily to what many people think that it's somewhat an animal-like activity, war is basically one of the most rationalized activities that humans do in the first place, and which is done essentially in the complete opposite direction of the instinct of survival, right? Self-preservation. You go out there not just to kill someone else, but essentially and first of all, in a situation in which you could get killed as well, which, as far as you're concerned, I mean, it's more important evidently than killing the enemy, because it's not it wouldn't be convenient otherwise, given that your life is basically all you can start doing something from. So that's really the deal, right? And this is important. You can find many examples about the Cold War, and about the fact that we didn't turn ourselves into ashes yet, simply because in order to use a mean like a nuclear weapon of mass destruction, well, you would have to have motives that are actually more important than your own survival, which are very hard to find. And not that we didn't come close to that, also because of mistakes or things that can go wrong, and von Clausewitz will extensively talk about that either, but still that reinforces naturally the instrumental relation existing between war and politics, right? In any case, let's read. So, extent of the influence of danger. So, already the title tells you here what the point is how far danger can come to affect our military action. And in the end he writes, but to estimate exactly the influence of danger upon the principal actors in war, we must not limit its sphere to the physical danger of the moment, right? So this is clear. This is what we already partly explained, right? But what is interesting here is that von Clausewitz is talking about the principal actors in war. He's not talking about anything specific, but here he is aiming fundamentally at the top of the military hierarchy, up to the ranks, and this is important because we have seen how fundamentally the military action is directed from the above, and the most influent, most important, determinant, or even decisive actions that are taken in war are because they are commanded from the hierarchy that has control over who is down to it, the military vertex, let's say. What this means is that the soldier that popular culture has kind of focused its attention on from an emotional point of view, like every movie, every idea, concerning war is never, let's interview a general and see, what he thinks about that war, that operation, and no, let's interview the average soldier. Well, okay, yeah, also because it's plenty of them more than generals. But the concept here is still very important because there is a qualitative difference between the type of pressure deriving from danger exists between these two, between the ranks, and especially in spite of its outcomes. Like a soldier is risking his own life in the front line, right? So he's risking really all he has by certain standards immediately, right? He doesn't have to wait for the war to be over, for his country to be taken over by someone else. He is dead there. If he gets killed, there is no future, right? Only the dead have seen the end of the war. This was old say that is pretty eloquent in that sense, but it's still kind of emotionalistic driven. And soldiers die, right? Sadly enough, this is the reality of war that we tend to exercise in saying, this is like a game, it's gallant, it's great. No, it's ugly. War is extremely ugly and brutal and apparently senseless. But this appearance kind of evaporates the more, in fact, you rise up to the ranks, because at that point you understand that what happens on the front line, albeit important because it's how actually the war is fought, still the most important directions, the most important things that happen do because they are the consequence of the decision of the boss, right? So this boss can be, like, you can talk about the general, but as we know, historically speaking, the top of the military hierarchy can even be the top of political hierarchy sometimes, and in any case, the top of the military hierarchy has a constant dialogue with the political power of reference, right? So, because that's where he gets his mandate from. He's not there because out of his own pleasure or whatever. It's because the military instrument, hence the military, has received a political mandate. This is how it works. It's not the military fighting for the taste of it, even if the military in the Clausewitzian Trinity is the element that kind of takes kind of sort of lost from the idea of the thrill from danger, from gambling, right? From this idea that it's a challenge, right? The military is competitive, it has to be so, because that's essential in order to struggle, to fight, to find a solution that can outsmart the enemy most of the time. But it's never certain, right? So here von Clausewitz is analyzing the principal actors in war. I like how he remains vague in this. So he's looking, however, at who direct the war, right? And noticing that objectively the feelings, the moral, the spiritual pressure, let's say, that weighs on them, albeit mediated like by the fact that maybe that they're not risking their life personally, which really depends, telling the truth, historically speaking, is going to have an incredibly important impact on how all war is waged, simply because the soldier on the front line is depending on the decision of these people, right? It can be a Rambo-like warrior, but if there is no, if the general made the wrong choice, there is no Rambo that wins or survives, right? So that's the reality of conflict in terms of sheer size of it. And I insist a lot on this because it may sound anecdotal or not important, especially if you are used to think about war essentially exclusively sometimes from that frontline perspective, from an individual soldier perspective, let's say better. But war is much more than that. War is fundamentally dominated by what happens at the top. Literally, right? It's not just a say. There are not miracles that you can do on the battlefield if you don't have a lot of things that have supported you in that enterprise, right? And history shows us continuously that you can be courageous as much as you like, skilled as much as you like, but if the leadership takes a wrong direction, you're done for, right? You die, you're defeated, and there is nothing to do with that anymore. And this is basically the history of every single war, right? It's not difficult to find this. Excuse me, I drink a little before we go on. And excuse me, I was saying that you understood, I believe, at this point. And that's why von Clausewitz here is addressing, especially, is emphasizing, let's say, especially this fact that the danger and fear stemming from it is not about the most immediate physical danger of the moment, right? It's about much more, right? Why does von Clausewitz concentrate on this now? Well, as you know now, if you have been listening to the last 20, 19 paragraphs, is because he stresses how the physical side of the story, even in danger, even in peril, is paradoxically the least important element, right? It can condition, what happens, once again, in combat with individual soldiers and how they react, even maybe as a unit, even in larger, and this is still important because naturally an entire army can be exposed to the threat of being annihilated at one point. So it's shaded, right? It's a matter of scale, of degrees, but still, it's not really, the point here is finding out in these paragraphs what the theory of the art of war should be, and fundamentally, if the theory of the art of war was concerned exclusively with the immediate danger that a bayonet or a bullet or a mitraille presents on you at that given moment, you basically don't take into consideration all the even potential danger that has even made you come on the battlefield or having all those things being there, right? This is extremely important because you realize that at that point the fear of combat, of getting killed into that single moment, is not quite important as, for example, the idea of being annihilated as a country, or risking an enormous amount of things that can be even more important than your own life, right? Because ideally, I think people presented with the immediacy of their death, of course, that they're posed under such a pressure that it's difficult to generalize. But let's say when they're cold minded, let's say, it's obvious that you would kind of sacrifice yourself if this meant, I don't know, that your children could live on, right? You could sacrifice yourself, as millions of people did throughout history, for things like your own country, right? It can sound rhetorical at certain levels, but telling the truth, it is not, because really the future of entire nations sometimes have been decided objectively through war. So there is nothing really to kid about this, aside from certain ideologies that are stressed, etc., and that are kind of dogmatically taken as you should always sacrifice yourself. No. But objectively, this kind of economic take on reality is always there. And there are certain political and also hence military actions that you can't simply say, well, okay, I will do this because I feel like it today. No, there is always a motive, a motivation. And here we still didn't arrive there, but I repeated it in the last paragraph as well, that fundamentally there's no political, there's no government, let's say, that can carry, cannot enact, cannot start a war without the support of 50% plus one of its people, right? It doesn't work like that, historically speaking. There's never like that. The myth that totalitarianisms and dictatorships make those poor peoples going to war because they're so innocent and they're against the threat. No, it doesn't work like that, because those peoples could easily kind of change the situation. Okay, maybe not easily, with a lot of, but surely they could most of the times stop that, actually stop that, instead then reversing, I don't know, death and destruction upon other people that are not there. So the reason why that happens, for example, or doesn't happen, is exactly this one, is that there is a balance of ideas and of feelings and resources that can be put in motion to make people do certain things. That is always that people doing that certain thing, or at least borrowing its own energies and feelings to do a certain thing. So this thing is naturally balanced, is calculated, economically speaking. And it doesn't happen by no, wars do not happen by no reason. And there are responsibilities that are often not acknowledged, right? That like the example I just made, that guy was under totalitarianism, so he had just to go to war because otherwise he would have been killed. Well, yeah, what if all the people had risen at that point not to go to war for the evil dictator? The evil dictator could have not done anything about that, right? Because that's literally as it is. I mean, what's even the political point in slaughtering your own people at that moment, and for what? For your enemies to destroy you more easily? Like, it doesn't make sense. So let's always be objective about this, because it's not a matter of opinion of how this happens. It's literally how it happens, and von Clausewitz knew it particularly well, and that's why I really always rant about the emotionalistic take on warfare, because still war is told through these patterns, right? Every single damn World War II documentaries on YouTube is full of comments of people who said, these were brave soldiers, were just brought there by an evil tyrant. They didn't want to do it. No, they did want to do it. And they committed some of the most ferocious atrocities, not just in the name of their dictators, but also of their country, or also themselves, because, hey, guess what? We are humans, and we do pretty messed up things on our own, as much as we can do also very good things. And the discriminant in there is, in fact, what these people have chosen to do, right? So let's not be naive or childish, because such positions on the issue basically are simply ignorant. They're emotionally driven. They're usually driven by thoughts like, I don't want to make these people guilty because I kind of like it for some, I don't know, identitary reason, for some nationalistic reason, some political reasons, whatever it is, and therefore I want to make them appear as pure, as little angels who were sent to be murderers just because there was a terrible guy at the top. No, it doesn't work like that, right? Because if those people had crossed their arms and not gone to fight, the dictator would have not had anyone to, would have not had an army to do that. So once again, study history seriously. Do not think that these are truly matter of opinions. Today we are rising at one point thinking that whichever thing we crosses our mind is our opinion, therefore we feel entitled to defend it just because it's our own, not because it makes sense, because it's rational, because it's backed by evidence or by logic. No, I just feel, and it's proven that when humans think politics, they're essentially shutting a part of their brain, right? It's proven scientifically that is essentially the part of the brain that entails rationality and objectivity. Because guess what? We are programmed like that. We're programmed like that since we were kind of hunter-gatherers. We've worked like that. Our society was either following that guy or following that other guy, and that's how simple that was in our society. Today, our society is overwhelmingly more complex and complicated, at the point we don't understand basically anything about it, unless we don't have some kind of education that tells us at least a little bit about it. And that's the world in which we have to cope, right? And von Clausewitz, in the 19th century, the Western world was already, developed enough to present this kind of difficulty. So it's very, very impressive that von Clausewitz managed to see this true, right? Because this is not really a matter of understanding details. This is about understanding the essentials. That's also another thing that it's rarely done when studying military history, thinking that what matters is, to know military history is, what caliber that gun had, or, where was that button placed on the uniform. That's for kind of collectionists or stuff like that. What matters are this massive, overwhelming moral forces that put kind of together all what is needed to fight a war, and that makes the difference at the end of the day. So as you see, we have a lot of problems today as a culture, a civilization, to revert the picture that we have erroneously drawn, right? And that was already known just by a thinker by von Clausewitz that is also popularly unknown, but every military in the world is fundamentally using its own principles historically. I mean, not unconsciously, like it's doing it because von Clausewitz has been overwhelmingly studied all over military academies all over the world in the last centuries, and it's kept being done. So we have this pretty well known work that has been recognized basically by anyone, aside from a bunch of complainers with kind of weird ideologies, as the base of what our military should be, and our military theory should be like in practice. And we don't care. We don't even know who he is, and we don't. Even when we read him, we fundamentally tend to misinterpret him, misunderstand it, whatever, right? And it would be interesting to make a story of this, like also historically speaking, to see how many states that were that were believing to follow von Clausewitz's theory, that they hadn't understood it, and they failed pretty badly. Exactly, not because they had followed von Clausewitz, like someone would say, but because they thought they were following him, but they had not understood him. It's like Germany during the world wars, right? Let's be frankly honest here. Germany was defeated, brutally twice in the two major conflicts of the 20th century and the history of mankind, for that matter. And in both cases, they were following von Clausewitz, right? And many, great part of the reason why culturalism re-emerged in part after World War II was a kind of an was saying, look at the Germans. They used von Clausewitz. They were defeated twice, and they even developed kind of in the second, especially, some kind of very evil thing. So Hans von Clausewitz was wrong, and let's flip its ideas, even if it doesn't make any sense, with basically every scientific evidence that we have at our disposal, because we need to think that war is bad, and not just an instrument, while it's actually politics that is bad and that eventually uses war as an instrument, right? And so many people out there are convinced of things like this, like people who study Little Hart or Kagan, and they actually believe that they understand von Clausewitz, which basically, if you read what they wrote, they simply, that you doubt they actually have even read it in the first place, because they're literally saying something that von Clausewitz not even talks about. So this is not a rant, and I get quite preachy about it, but I care very much about these perspectives, because I truly believe that if we all had a kind of an elementary idea of what von Clausewitz wrote, we would be much better as citizens, as political beings, right? And we would have a much clearer idea of how to evaluate politics, society, not just war, because war, fortunately, at this point, yeah, it's there, even very close to us. Sometimes we don't see that, but we do live in a world in the West, at least, which we don't presume we have to use it on an extensive scale. So it's fine. We live in a kind of made jackpot, considering the past history of mankind has been pretty brutal. We will live in a moment, at least, of relative prosperity. Actually, the greatest moment of prosperity in the history of mankind. But so not just one. So we could at least concentrate on those aspects. If we are really so allergic to the idea of war that we can't refuse it, we have to refuse it even as a political instrument. We can at least start by concentrating on what von Clausewitz said about politics and society, to eventually understand that we have to take into consideration war the way it is, and not to be hysterical or dogmatic about it, simply because it is how we are programmed genetically by evolution. It's not. That's why it's not a matter of opinion. That's why every subjectiveness in front of these topics is, you have at least to prove me that these things are wrong. And fortunately, culturalism is losing pieces, day by day, fortunately, because science is destroying it, fundamental. But then we need a further step. We need to reevaluate this work. We have to reevaluate this thinker, and to understand that we need von Clausewitz more than ever in this historical moment, where so much is being decided, sadly enough, also by arms around the world, with consequences that impact us directly at every moment, right? I know actually many people, even think about my former friends, classmates, that they said, "Oh well, I don't care what's happening, I don't know, in Iraq, in Libya. I don't care, I'm here, they're there." No, and that's probably one of the most stupid attitudes one can ever formulate, because it's not a matter of moral commitment that is surely there as well in part, but it's simply ignorant, in the sense that those people do not see what we know influences us a lot and constantly, and very often sooner that we can't even realize. So whatever, we will simply go on now with von Clausewitz, who writes, in fact, the danger dominates over the actor, not only by threatening him, but also by threatening all entrusted to him, not only at the moment in which it is actually present, but also through the imagination at all other moments which have a connection with the present. This is very important, because here he retakes the aspect of the leader, the military leader, says that danger dominates him. Now this is very important to say for a person that was a general, right? He's saying danger dominates over the actor, which doesn't mean here you can think of course about it as fear, right? As obviously people are scared about what is going on, but von Clausewitz emphasizes not by threatening the individual only, but also all those who are entrusted to him, and not only at the moment in which the danger is actually there, right, at the moment, but through the imagination at all other moments that have a connection with the present. That is to say, in other words, that generals behave according to fear, soldiers behave according to fear, and basically every single thing we do at any moment is controlled by fear, right? It's directed by fear, because you can't say danger easily here, but the obvious consequence is that you have to watch out what the hell is going on at every single second, which means to have to fear, essentially, but still to kind of reacting accordingly to spare yourself further damage for what can happen, right? So especially the hierarchy here is very important, because you realize that the military commander is acting in ways that influence definitely those who are under him, right? So it's not simply thinking this as, okay, the soldier is scared because of what he sees in the front on the front line, and the general just because of the general strategy, because the soldiers are carrying out now plans that the general, who was considering fear, danger at that point, decided to do under fear, right? So everything is directed from here and from the top hierarchies. And what von Clausewitz is saying here is that the top hierarchies actually feel, as we will see now, a much higher responsibility than the soldier, right? The soldier can have this more immediate kind of a weird reaction to the of course to whatever can happen. That essentially you go nuts when you're presented with some circumstance. But there's a breaking point for everybody. The myth of soldiers who are all prepared, can do everything, doesn't belong to reality. The point though is that the same war, the way it's led, right, is dictated by danger, right? Because otherwise these armies would simply meet, would kill each other in a blink of an eye. No, but instead most of military action is based on this constant avoidal of the most direct contact, which is, telling the truth, something that damages the whole system overall. Like, we have already seen it, but we'll see it better at one point, especially in the part in which von Clausewitz talks about attack and defense, that if you really have to do something and you're aware of that, the tendency should be to do things extremely fast as possible, right? So that there would be a major bloodbath at one point, but still that would be less than all the various massacres scattered around, right? So all of this is particularly important because it also divides the imminent threat, the physical threat, from the kind of all the threats that can happen at all times. Already Caesar wrote something like, men fear more the unexpected than what they actually have in front of their eyes, which is true. This is a very fine observation, in fact, that von Clausewitz recognizes. For all actions here are not dictated just by the immediate danger, but what can happen theoretically. But also because, let's remember, most of what is going on in war is actually unknown. So that's a big deal, because if you really don't know what's going on most of the time, you can't even know how bad things can turn if you don't watch out, and that is a big deal. So sometimes soldiers are even kind of seeming reckless and not caring in front of the actual face of danger, right? That's typical, I don't know, of trench warfare. Even if in there it's more like but it's still on the same line. That soldiers actually preferred the moment of the attack, so the one in which they went to die, yes, than the wait for it, right? Because adrenaline rushes in, and you kind of have to do this, and you distract yourself. Instead, if you stay there in the mud, and idling under shell fire and shelling, and you're simply waiting, doing nothing, well, that's psychologically disruptive. Yet it's what, at the end of the day, it's gonna influence most of all the moral resources of the army as a whole, given that, as we've seen, most of war is actually not combat at all, right? It's most of war is really a suspension of the military of combat, right? And these long pauses in which lots of other things have to be carried out in order to be able to fight, even in the same war, right? Not just in in peacetime, but in general, even the two things are kind of distinguishable, non-distinguishable. So one of the most important aspects of this is recognizing that the physical threat in itself doesn't tell us much about the theory of the art of war in itself, right? It can tell us that, of course, if you are presented with a threat of being shot down by a rifle that has a certain range, and you find yourself in front of that, you're gonna react in a certain way. But still, that doesn't tell us individually what that individual soldier will be influenced by in his mind throughout all the time that he has to arrive, for example, in range of that rifle, or simply from which direction it has to arrive, from with the general commitment to the cause of that action, and all that stuff. That's what's really important, and that's something you can't measure. Also, as you can't measure fear anyway, because you can measure the range of that rifle, but you can't measure how a single person can respond to that threat immediately, right? Human courage is influenced by a lot of factors, including, whether it's day or night, if you have eaten or not, if you have previous experience, if you feel yourself tired or rested, a lot of things that you can't calculate at every second, and that are produced and changing constantly in very unforeseen fashion, say, for which how can you really calculate them, and pretending that there can be a positive approach to the theory of the art of war for that matter, right? Von Clausewitz goes on and says, lastly, not only directly by itself, but also indirectly by the responsibility which makes it bear with tenfold weight of the mind of a chief actor. Now, this is very important because it tells you basically that those who command have a much, and feel, actually, and they do feel a much higher responsibility than those who fight, right? Like they just have to obey orders, right? So generals have an enormously greater responsibility and feeling of responsibility that crushes them than the individual soldier. The individual soldier can assess danger, but his fear is just immediate. It has to do, in fact, whether he comes into the range of that rifle or not. The one of a general that has literally the fate of his country maybe in his hands, well, that is something much greater, right? And this goes against one of the other kind of cliches of anti-militarist or even populist character, like the general's just a bunch of pigs that they're idiotic and they just send people to die. Well, most of the times it's not the case. Most of the times generals are really great military minds that are there for that reason, and it's mostly the political direction that sucks, right? Many disasters that we, militarily speaking, observe in history are not much of a military, they don't stem from a military incompetence, but they're rather stemming from a political incompetence that misuses the military instrument. And that's the deal. War is an instrument. Whatever you do with that, you are responsible for it. So you can even be the best driver in the world, but someone tells you, crash against a tree. You have to do it, let's assume. That's a disaster anyway, right? And that's the point, and that's why even the connect, the relations between the military leaders and their governments is a serious matter, because at some point it can degenerate into something different, let's say in the sometimes in the measure even of maybe a rebellion or mutiny or whatever, because these are things that have always to be considered when confronted with extremely difficult situations that sometimes can be resolved only through arms, right? And that's where at one point even the political aim has to pass through the military, that at that point has more than just a military duty, but also a political and social responsibility, at least in the outcome of its actions, right? So the myth that generals just smoke cigars while soldiers are there to die in the mud is not really realistic, and especially it kind of develops the competence of the military. The pressure of danger does develop it, because when you're on such a big pressure, you have to work hard to find a solution. And that's why we need generals, right? And we need a hierarchy, we need someone who takes action on the base of such competencies, because there is no other way to deal with anything without hierarchies. In politics, in society, in war, it's always the same thing. We need that, even if the system obviously has flaws, but still that's the only thing you should be doing, right? Even the animal kingdom works like that. It's not a matter of saying, oh well, this is just cultural. No, it's not cultural, and that's why culturalism sucks, because culturalism tries to make you buy into the lie that essentially hierarchies exist because people are evil. No, science shows us that this is not true. On the contrary, probably hierarchies are some of the best and incredibly spontaneous structures that are formed, socially speaking, and that work incredibly well, right? And even if we basically spend all of our life to criticize someone else for the for the problems that we have, telling the truth, we can do a freaking lot if we are competent enough to deal with certain situations, right? And so the people who are at the top generally are, or at least they generally have an understanding that in their field is probably higher than the one. Of course, there are critical moments in which maybe a hierarchy has to fall, right? This happened historically speaking, but at that time that happens exactly because there are other hierarchies who are stronger, more competent, and more fitting to the role that is needed that emerge, right? So our human societies function from this point of view very well, right? Given the incredibly complicated picture that society is. That's why also von Clausewitz is so so insightful because he recognizes, and this picture is also in order to understand von Clausewitz really, because once you acknowledge that there are certain patterns that societies follow in order to work, even though seemingly recollecting all the all what the societies are seems impossible to understand in any way, is amazing. It's a miracle of nature, of society, of humanity. I mean, we do work. We improved. We have complex systems based on competence that work, and that have led us up to this point, which is not a few. It is not a few. It's incredible. It's not to be given for granted. That's why people will have to overthrow hierarchies just in a blink of an eye, for the sake of it, without motivating it, without having any kind of reason, but just shouting or doing nothing about building something else. They're completely useless to our own society, or maybe they're useful in the measure in which they strengthen the hierarchy, right? We were talking about this on other occasions, right? We need extremists if we want a solid, strong, moderate center that works and makes most of the stuff. Because if there wasn't that pressure, we would relax, much more quickly, and we would make the system degenerate, right? We need this kind of pressure and this kind of conflict within our world, right? And you can read really von Clausewitz through these lines. So this concept is very important. Those who are at the top have a much greater feeling of responsibility than those who are at the bottom. And in fact, and von Clausewitz now explains it, because he makes this rhetorical question saying, who could advise or resolve upon a great battle without feeling his mind more or less wrought up or perplexed by the danger and responsibility which such a such a great act of decision carries in itself? But it's obvious, right? Who would be like free and relaxed or lighthearted by saying, okay, well, yeah, let's declare a war, let's go to war, let's fight this battle, yet even if there is an overwhelming threat that we'll all get killed or enslaved or whatever. No, let's do it. But it's obvious that there is an enormous responsibility. Just think about all the political debates revolving this, and feelings that are definitely dictated by the fear of saying, will this go well? Is it necessary? Are we doing the right thing? And the other thing is saying, well, we have to try, It's never usually, oh yes, it will work, cent for cent. Then politics uses its own tricks and words and whatever. But the concept is pretty clear, that all of this great machine of society, of politics or war, do work like this. Like, they do work with this enormous responsibility that increases the more the rank increases. The higher you get hierarchically. And so, and the myth is that this is not true, that who is at the top doesn't have any pressure. And in this passage, von Clausewitz crushes it. Like, who is the person who could take certain decisions without caring? Right, of course, there are certain, let's say, examples, but they are limited to very narrow things, actually, like kings that decide, to make a decision that, of course, will make people die, and the whole thing maybe will be, there are mistakes, let's put it easily, like this. But it doesn't mean that others would have been necessarily better at doing that job, or maybe if they are, they will emerge at one point, like a political force on their own, like a hierarchy on their own, like it happened in the past. But it's always, as you understand here, everything is driven by moral forces. It's not about the the technicality of the expectation, what can happen. It's about the bigger picture. It's about the bigger plan, bigger consequences. And those are really the ones that lead and that motivate and that bring people to move and to do something about things, because we all realize that there is a greater thing. Like, just think about it for 1 second. Like, imagine your life. Doesn't matter. Let's take the most individualistic person out there and say, we all have a sense of things. Like, we do all think that at one point, even if maybe there is not a sense to everything, that maybe it's we have a pretty nihilistic view of life, of existence, but we all sense that we have a need to get up and do something, right? Then of course there are, depressed people who are ill in that sense, and therefore they don't work at this, or they're supposed to. We can't do anything, but that's an illness, in fact, and that is curable, fortunately enough, most of the times. But in terms of a average-willed person, but we all have a reason, a motive, a bigger picture that motivates us. Do we really care how certain things can be done? We think about doing them first. That's the first mover. That's what leads us throughout all the whole time. Then how to do them comes later. Like, we can learn about that. And this is what, generally speaking, Von Clausewitz is talking about, making us reflect how it's not the mathematically measurable datum can tell us about how certain things will be. We just behave, and this is a big question, also in terms of artificial intelligence and whatever. And we have an ability that is superior to any other form of intelligence that we know, and that's a big deal, right? So never underestimate here what your mind does. People who are overly concerned about technology and technicalities and details are people who probably don't realize the incredible gift that we have with our mind, which is a basically always undeserved gift, because we make a very poor use of it. But we have it. And we can accomplish a lot. It's just a matter of wanting that. So hence it's a matter of moral resources. Even if there are certain material aspects of the story that, of course, slow us down, but still we have the ability to think through that problem, to try to solve it, and to find another way, because that's essentially what we're programmed for, which is amazing. So von Clausewitz concludes with this phrase saying, "We may say that action in war, insofar as it is real action, not a mere condition, is never out of the sphere of danger." Now, this phrase is probably most important in the whole picture, because it really makes you understand why he's dealing with this affair, right? Because we may say that real action in war, not a mere condition, not a mere theoretical abstraction, is never out of the sphere of danger. Now, this is the biggest deal of all. We're not talking about a theory, like this theory of the art of war, about an abstraction, like saying this theory of the art of war should function in the sense that if things were in a certain manner, then they would work that way. No. That would be, impossible to do. Here we're dealing with reality. We don't need to abstract. We don't need to abstract factors to say, okay, that's all what we need, because reality is self-evidently complicated enough not to understand a freaking damn about it. So if we stop at kind of even simplifying this system, we can understand even less than that. So when we're dealing with real action, you can't take out fear out of the equation, because fear is always there. And why? Because every action in war is never out of the sphere of danger. That's the point. That's the whole point. So for all those theorists that we have criticized with von Clausewitz in the previous paragraphs, that were fundamentally saying, okay, in order to explain a war, we should just abstract everything like a mathematical equation, like a set of geometries, of geometrical principles, like I have to deploy my troops in that way or that way in order to win, and that's the victory. Those are completely meaningless. Because what happens in reality, even if it passes through material things that can be ordered in a more or less economic fashion, in a kind of more intelligent fashion, still what matters at a bigger level is something else. And even more, it's not even a comparative realization. It's really about the fact that even those theoretical abstractions that we want to applicate in real war are influenced immediately at all times, like during, before, and after, by fear of danger. That's it. So even if you really wanted to applicate them, because we've seen that, like even Jomini's theories with the précis de l'art de la guerre, with the concept that, yeah, of course, if you have a battle line, you can deploy troops in a kind of a more effective way. Yeah, it kind of makes sense. But if you want to start thinking about that in the first place, you have to acknowledge that you may not have that the possibility of enacting that specific tactics, simply because maybe everything is perfect, but moral is not. And troops will not necessarily behave the way you think on a battlefield. But where are the moral forces in there? What if a side of the line is weaker than the other? How can you measure that, by the way? I mean, you have to take into account, and that can alter radically that theoretical abstraction, because it is abstracted. It's not real. It applies to a world. It applies to a world that doesn't exist as such. It's an idealization that at one point, should have, like, if it's pure theoretical speculation, well, okay, do it if it's funny for you. But here we're talking about winning real wars. And that's what all von Clausewitz is interested about. What could you do otherwise? That's the real problem. That's the real point. And that's why this world theory is so important and overlooked. Because it fundamentally presents you with what should be the most obvious realization that everything we do is morally influenced at the root, essentially, and that before doing anything, we should question why we're doing it, and we will find that it's mostly because we have a desire. It's not because we have the material means to do it. It's because we want to do it. And that changes everything at the base. That makes you willing to create those means and to use them and to learn how to use them. Right? That's really very, very, very important. Because this is more than just war, as I always say. Never think that von Clausewitz, in this sense, is useful only to win wars, right? This is useful also for political and social aims at the end of the day, because it makes you understand so much about it as well, because essentially it's the same thing. These are cognitive problems. These are scientific problems. They're not opinions. They're not fashions. They're not inclinations, right? They are as real as they get, and that's why this work is such a masterpiece, because you will never find such like anything similar. Like I personally don't know, human literature, right? Anything that tops this for its aim. Like and here's the genius of the man, that nobody in now 180, 190 actually years, that also of some of the most advanced and sophisticated growth in scientific, literary, or um, um, cultural growth has managed to surpass. And this should speak by itself, right? Um, so, well, okay. I realized that my Von Clausewitz videos are getting pretty rambly at one point. I don't know how many. I don't know how it is to listen to this stuff from the other side. Also because I believe me, I always realize that when there are certain issues related to politics, war, society, it's always saying, what is this guy doing, right? What is he talking about? And I don't like him. He seems to know too much, right? Or that he feels too self-entitled or too arrogant, too sure about what he's saying. But frankly, I tell you this because, I don't feel at all in the sense that I realize how important it is to think in this kind of negative fashion. Right, this is a negative fashion. This is the denial of a positive, of the effectiveness of a positive approach. Right, it's very important in this sense. It's not simply saying, I this is the formula. Take it. Von Clausewitz was a great system critic, and he kind of creates a another system on its own, right? But it's very differently based, and that's what makes the big difference at the end of the day. So that's why it's so meaningful, because it's non. I would say non-mainstream, but that's not really the point. He's actually very mainstream in terms of rationality, right? This is probably one of the most rational works you will ever find. This is, it sounds like a set of opinions. Like the first time you open the Vom Kriege, you start reading all these paragraphs, and you say, "What the hell this guy's doing?" Like it looks like a set of anecdotes sometimes, like of all this small paragraphs. For example, in this second chapter, second book, let's say, this is a system. This is a chain. It's obvious that when you open the book and you look at this, you don't get that. But if you start reading it and actually studying it, because not even reading it is sufficient, you will find out what this is really about. And I tell you, because I don't have any, as I often say, I don't have any interest to tell you otherwise. I know what's the feeling of feeling distrustful towards something that is new, that it seems strange, that it seems different, but in this case it's worth the pain. It's freaking great. And I since we talk about von Clausewitz because we essentially deal with military history on Schwerpunkt, well, this is the point. I mean, this is the real deal. If you want to understand military history, you can't but pass through this theory, because it's not detached from it. It's literally applicable to every single military historical event, and that's why it's so important, and that's why it works so much, and it gives you a lot of hope and of energy, and it's from the negativity of the approach that you get a lot of positive feelings about the whole thing, because it makes you realize how much effort is wasted to try to set certain grounds that will not hold, and that instead shows you what actually makes a difference. And it's simpler than you would think. I mean, it's kind of hard, but at least it works, because the other options it's still hard, but it never ends because it's useless, because it doesn't solve anything. So there are so many philosophical considerations you could make about this contents, and that's the reason why I talk so much just for commenting such a small paragraph, right? But every bit of this is necessary, right? It's a fact, okay, well, and we will definitely go on. Hopefully, at least, everything, the worst can happen. This is what von Clausewitz teaches you, right? The worst that you can imagine, well, that's not as bad as what can really happen to you at every moment. So, unfortunately, but that's exactly what makes us move, right? Because otherwise we wouldn't do anything about our lives. Alright, so just for today, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like, or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time, and see you next time. Bye.